But for Netanyahu, this was an opportunity. And if you're a good politician, and I suppose Netanyahu is a good politician, I can't really tell because he fills me with such loathing. He knew this was an opportunity to carry on another agenda, namely, how do you radicalize Hamas and so delegitimize them as a credible negotiating interlocutor? And so he launched what was called Operation Brother's Keeper, allegedly to find the 3 kids, even though, as I said, it was known almost immediately that they had been killed. And they proceeded to kill a half dozen or more Palestinians, blow up several Palestinian homes, all in the West Bank, ransack businesses, and arrest about 500 Palestinians, overwhelmingly Hamas members. And the purpose was perfectly clear for anybody who wanted to see it, namely, they wanted to keep provoking Hamas into a violent reaction, so that Mr. Netanyahu can then throw up his hands in despair to the world and say, you see, I told you, they're terrorists. You can't negotiate with them. Or as he put it later to a U.S. State Department official, he said that never second guess me again when it comes to Hamas. Well, initially Hamas resisted the provocations, but there are other factions in Gaza which didn't resist the provocations. They started firing the homemade weapons, and at some point the whole thing spiraled out of control, and the new round, or the third major assault began. That as Hamas holds back, as Islamic Jihadi holds back,
as they had another militant group inside,
as they absorb all the brutal, vicious Israeli provocations, the New York Times weighs in and it says that the Palestinians in Gaza are posing a lethal threat to Israel. Kites. They say that the Palestinians are flying kites which are somehow going to burn down Israel. Because Hamas refuses to fire the quote-unquote rockets, which are not even rockets, so they don't have that pretext. So the Israeli propagandists on the New York Times, like Isabel Kirshner, so now they've conjured a new pretext. These kites, which they say are going to burn Israel to the ground. I think you're having a problem.
من فکر میکنم که شما مشکل دارین در شنیدن به حرفای من فکر میکنم اینکه به خاطر اینکه همه این تلاش‌ها برای این بود که اسرائیل حتما بتونه یک واکنشی رو از حماس بیرون بکشه تا ناچار نشه که وارد مذاکره بشه. حالا سوال من از شما اینه: اگر یک دولت اتحاد ملی شکل می‌گرفت، اگر که اتحادیه اروپا و آمریکا میپذیرفتن که با یک دولت اتحاد ملی مذاکره بکنن، چه چیزی میتونه جلوی توافق رو بگیره؟ شما میگید که حماسه، اما این باعث میشه که این عملا باعث میشه که شما تبدیل بشید به کسی که داره دفاع میکنه از اسرائیل. به خاطر اینکه
آقای فینکلستین، من نظر
Now, here's the point. The point is, no country in the world, none, including the United States, No country in the world condemned Sadat for aggression. None. And, for Israel, it was a close call. Or it seemed to be. In retrospect, it turned out not to be. But it seemed to be a close call. Nobody condemned Egypt. Why? Its demand was legitimate. Return to Sinai, it's not yours. It's our territory. Number two, he tried negotiations for 6 years. And number three, as hard as he tried to negotiate, the Israelis kept provoking and provoking and provoking until they announced for building the all-Jewish city of Carmel, and Sadat says, over. And then plans with Syria, the attack, which happens, they call it the Yom Kippur War, the October War in 1973. So now fast forward to Putin. Demand was reasonable, neutralize Ukraine. Negotiates over 20 years, they're fighting over this thing, this NATO expansion in the east. And then they start provoking him even more. They start pouring weapons into Ukraine. They start carrying on joint military exercises between Ukraine and NATO. And then all of these smarmy Nazis start to surface. No, I'm not saying Nazis control the government, but they played an outsized role in the government.
And the second main reason for the attack is because Hamas was signaling that it wanted a diplomatic settlement of the conflict along the June 1967 border. That is to say, Hamas was signaling that it had joined the international consensus, it had joined most of the international community, overwhelmingly the international community, in seeking a diplomatic settlement. And at that point, Israel was faced with what Israelis call a Palestinian peace offensive. And in order to defeat the peace offensive, they sought to dismantle Hamas. And the peace plan is the two-state settlement, a just resolution of the refugee question, and the Arab world goes one step further. It says, Israel, just obey international law, a full withdrawal, resolution of the refugee question. We won't simply renounce belligerency. They say we'll go one step further. We'll enter into normal relations, economic relations, trade, tourism, and so forth. And then along comes Hamas. And the last few years, Hamas has been saying the same thing. And this is an exceptional circumstance.
Because Hamas refuses to fire the quote-unquote rockets, which are not even rockets,